Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're diving headfirst into something, well, pretty miraculous. The physical development of infants.
Yeah, it's truly amazing.
Think about it, from those first tiny wiggles to eventually chasing after toys, that first year, and even beyond. It's just a period of absolutely breathtaking transformation, touching their entire being.
Right.
From their rapidly constructing brains to their brand new senses and those amazing first attempts at movement.
Exactly. And for this deep dive, we've really immersed ourselves in some fascinating research, looking at these incredible leaps in physical growth, the blueprint of their nervous system taking shape, how all those vital bodily systems start coordinating, the set of inborn reflexes they arrive with, almost like a survival toolkit,
Right, like a starter pack.
Kind of. Then there's the astonishing journey of their motor skill milestones, non-negotiable role of nutrition in all this.
Sure.
Their senses waking up to a whole new world, and finally, how they start to weave together all that sensory input to actually make sense of it all.
So our mission today, really, is to pull out the most mind-blowing and practically useful insights from all this information, give you a real shortcut, maybe, to understanding this foundational phase of human development.
Sounds good.
Okay, so let's get right to it. Let's talk about the incredible changes happening to their little bodies first.
Well, the rate of growth. Height and weight gain in the first year, it's unlike anything we'll ever see again in our lives.
Right.
And it's not just, a general getting bigger. It follows some really intriguing patterns.
Like the head-to-toe progression, right? What's the term for that?
That's the cephalocaudal principle. Cephalo meaning head, caudal meaning tail or down.
Okay.
Think about it. Newborns have proportionally huge heads compared to their bodies.
Definitely noticed that.
Yeah, and that reflects the early, rapid development of the brain and the sensory systems up there. So control then gradually extends downwards. That's why newborns have relatively decent head and neck control compared to, say, their legs.
I see. That makes sense why you support the head so carefully.
Exactly. It influences how you naturally hold a baby.
Okay. And then there's the other one, center outward development. How does that work?
That's the proximo-distal principle. Proximo near, distal far. So imagine a baby first gaining control of their torso, their core, then their arms and legs, and then finally their hands and feet. It's like their core strength develops first, and that paves the way for more refined movements out at the extremities.
Fascinating. So it's a very organized process, really. And I think you mentioned there are a couple of other principles at play, too.
Precisely. There's hierarchical integration. That's basically how simple skills become the building blocks for much more complex ones.
Like?
Well, a baby needs to figure out how to grasp something, right, before they can even think about stacking blocks or feeding themselves. Simple leads to complex. And then there's the principle of the independence of systems, which just highlights that different bodily systems like the nervous system, the skeletal system, digestive system, they all grow and mature at their own unique pace. They're not all locked into the same developmental schedule.
Okay, so this tiny body is on this incredibly rapid journey, guided by these really elegant principles. But under the hood, at the heart of all this change, is the unbelievable development of the brain and the entire nervous system.
Absolutely. The fundamental units here are neurons. These specialized cells, they're the information superhighways of the brain.
Right.
Each neuron has these branch-like bits called dendrites that receive messages from other neurons, and then a long projection called an axon that sends messages onward.
And how do these neurons actually talk to each other? Because they aren't, physically wired together, are they?
No, exactly. That's where neurotransmitters and synapses come in. Neurotransmitters are these chemical messengers that jump across the tiny gaps, the synapses between neurons. That's how they communicate. But what's truly remarkable, especially early on, is this process called synaptic pruning.
Synaptic pruning. Okay, that sounds like the brain is doing some serious editing.
That's a great way to put it, because early in development, the brain actually produces this vast overabundance of synapses. Way more than it needs.
Really? Why?
Well, it seems like it's creating potential pathways. Then, through experience, what the baby sees, hears, touches, interacts with the connections that get used frequently become stronger, more efficient, while the unused or weaker connections, they actually get eliminated, pruned away.
Wow.
Think of it like the brain fine-tuning its network, getting rid of the static to amplify the important signals.
Right.
So the experiences you provide in those early months, they aren't just filling a blank slate. They are actively sculpting the very wiring of the brain. deciding which connections get the bandwidth and which just fade away.
That's incredible. So a baby's everyday interactions are literally shaping their brain's architecture.
Amazing. Okay, and then there's myelination. That sounds like it's about making things faster.
You got it. Myelin is this fatty substance that coats the axons of neurons. It acts like insulation around an electrical wire.
Right.
And the better the insulation, the faster the signal can travel down that axon. So in the brain, this means quicker transmission of nerve impulses, faster processing, more efficient communication between different brain regions. This improved speed is absolutely crucial for developing more complex skills.
So faster signals basically mean faster development of abilities.
Generally speaking, yes, there's a strong correlation. We also see neurons migrating, moving to their proper spots in the brain, and the cerebral cortex, that wrinkly outer layer responsible for higher level thinking, along with the more basic subcortical structures, they're all developing incredibly rapidly.
And interestingly, these intense periods of brain growth often happen just before we see big leaps in a baby's behavior or how they perceive the world. The brain structure seems to pave the way.
Now, this is where it gets really important, I think, to bring up something quite sobering. Shaken baby syndrome. It's just such a stark reminder of how fragile this developing brain really is.
It is a critical point, absolutely. It's tragic, but violently shaking an infant can cause their delicate brain to move forcefully inside the skull.
Oh, gosh.
And this can tear blood vessels, and it can literally sever those very neuronal connections we've just been talking about. The consequences are devastating. Tragically, a very high percentage of survivors suffer permanent brain damage.
It's just heartbreaking to even think about.
Yeah.
And it really underlines the significance of brain plasticity, doesn't it? This idea that the brain can change.
Absolutely. The brain's remarkable ability to be shaped by experience, its plasticity, it's at its absolute peak during these early years. Think of like a young sapling, it's easily bent and shaped. The infant brain is kind of similar. The interactions, the stimulation it receives, they literally mold its structure and function, which leads us right into the concept of sensitive periods.
At sensitive periods. Okay, so these are specific times when the brain is particularly open, like receptive to certain kinds of input.
Precisely. During these specific windows, the brain is especially attuned to certain environmental influences, whether it's for, say, language development or learning social skills, or even refining how they process sensory information.
Right.
This is why all those nurturing interactions, the cuddling, talking, singing, playing, there's so much more than just nice, comforting activities. They're actively laying down crucial neural pathways. They're fostering healthy brain development in a very real way.
It really makes you think about how all these different parts of a baby, their body, their brain, start to kind of work together as a whole system. It's not just separate pieces growing on their own schedule, is it?
No, not at all. It's an incredibly integrated process. And right from the very start, a baby's behavior is heavily influenced by body rhythms.
Rhythms? Like
These predictable cyclical patterns we see in things like sleeping and waking, feeding times, even levels of fussiness or activity. And these rhythms are closely tied to their state, right? Which is basically their level of alertness or awareness at any given moment.
Okay, yeah, like being deeply asleep or drowsy or wide awake and alert.
Exactly. A baby's state of arousal, how aware they are of both what's going on inside their body and in the world around them, is deeply connected to these underlying biological rhythms. And interestingly, these different states actually produce distinct, measurable patterns in their brain's electrical activity. Scientists can see this using an EEG.
Let's talk about sleep for a moment, because it seems like that's, well, a dominant activity in early infancy.
It certainly is. Newborns spend a huge chunk of their time sleeping, although, as many parents know, it often happens in these short, fragmented bursts that don't always line up nicely with adult sleep schedules.
Tell me about it.
And REM sleep, that active phase of sleep with rapid eye movements, that's also very prominent early on. Some researchers think it might play a role in what's called autostimulation.
Autostimulation.
Yeah, basically helping to keep the developing brain active and stimulated even during sleep, helping connections form.
Interesting. And we know there are different cultural approaches to infant sleep, like co-sleeping and things like that.
Yes, cultural norms definitely play a big role. And even environmental factors, like how much artificial light a baby is exposed to, can influence sleep patterns. But the one constant, really, is the somewhat unpredictable, sporadic nature of infant sleep in those early months.
Now, we need to shift gears slightly and address a really crucial and sometimes sensitive topic, SIDs and SEI. These are terms that understandably cause a lot of concern for parents.
Absolutely. And it's important to talk about sudden infant death syndrome, or SIDs, is the devastating and unexplained death of an apparently healthy infant, usually during sleep. Tragically, it still affects families every year. While the precise cause isn't fully understood, research strongly suggests a link to disruptions in the baby's normal breathing patterns during sleep, maybe related to immature brainstem development.
And this is where the American Academy of Pediatrics' Back to Sleep campaign has been so incredibly vital, hasn't it? Emphasizing putting infants on their backs to sleep.
Precisely. That simple guideline has had a significant, really positive impact on reducing SIDS rates. It's made a huge difference.
Okay. And SUID, how does that relate?
So SUID is a broader term. It stands for sudden, unexpected infant death. SOIDs is actually the most common type or category of SUI.
I see.
But other causes can fall under the SUI umbrella, like accidental suffocation or strangulation in the sleep environment, maybe from bedding or unsafe sleep surfaces.
Right, so creating a safe sleep space is key.
Absolutely essential.
Okay, shifting now to a, thankfully, more positive aspect of development. Let's explore the amazing set of inborn skills that newborns possess, their reflexes.
Oh, yes. These are truly fascinating. Reflexes are basically unlearned, involuntary responses. They happen automatically when a baby encounters a specific stimulus.
Like built-in software.
Kind of. They're like built-in survival mechanisms, really. They help them adapt to the world outside the womb and offer a degree of protection.
And we've all seen some of these, haven't we? Like, you gently touch a baby's cheek and they instinctively turn their head, searching. That's the rooting reflex, right?
Exactly. Looking for the nipple. And of course, the sucking reflex is essential for feeding right away. And there are many others, like the grasping reflex. Put your finger in a newborn's palm and they'll grip it incredibly tightly.
Yeah, surprisingly strong.
Right. And the stepping reflex, if you hold them upright with their feet just touching a surface, they'll make these little stepping motions.
Oh, yeah.
What's interesting is some of these, like the stepping reflex, seem to disappear after a few months, only to reappear later as a voluntary movement, like walking. It hints at this complex dance between innate programming and developing conscious control. And while these reflexes are a generally universal part of our shared biology, there can actually be subtle cultural variations in how strongly they're expressed. For instance, the moro, or startle reflex, might look a bit different depending on typical handling practices.
Interesting.
And importantly, pediatricians routinely check these reflexes, their presence, their strength, even their symmetry. They're important indicators of neurological health.
Okay, so these reflexes are kind of the starting blocks for movement, but then babies begin to develop more intentional, more controlled movements, their motor skills.
That's right. Initially, the gross motor skills, the ones involving the larger muscle groups, like in the arms and legs, they're quite rudimentary.
Yeah, kind of jerky and uncoordinated at first.
Exactly. And that's partly due to their body proportions, remember. That relatively large head, shorter limbs, and still developing muscle strength kind of constrain them. But even in those early weeks, they can achieve some basic movements, and as their strength increases, oh boy, their motor skills just blossom rapidly.
And what about the fine motor skills? The smaller, more precise movements, like with their hands?
They follow a similar path, really, progressing from simple actions to more complex ones. So around 3 months, maybe, you might see them batting at objects, a greater ability to coordinate their arms. And then by about 11 months or so, many babies develop that amazing pincer grasp using their thumb and forefinger to pick up tiny things like a Cheerio.
Right, a major milestone.
It really is. And even just the act of reaching for something, it becomes much more accurate and controlled around 4 months old. They start correcting their reach midstream.
It's just astonishing how quickly they gain this mastery over their bodies. And I understand there's a concept, dynamic systems theory, that helps explain how all these pieces kind of come together.
Yes, exactly. Dynamic systems theory is a really helpful way to think about it. It proposes that motor skills aren't just pre-programmed by genetics and then just unfold. Instead, they emerge from this complex interaction of multiple factors. Things like the baby's physical capabilities, their strength, their balance, but also their motivation, like wanting to reach that toy.
Right.
And the support or opportunities offered by their environment. So this framework helps us understand why different infants might reach motor milestones at slightly different times. It's this unique combination of interacting factors for each child.
So it's not just one thing, it's everything working together.
Precisely. And importantly, each newly acquired motor skill often builds upon the ones that came before it. Learning to sit helps you learn to crawl, which helps you learn to stand, and so on.
Now, as we talk about these milestones, we should probably touch on developmental norms. What exactly are those, and how are they used when we're thinking about a baby's progress?
Sure. Developmental norms basically represent the average age at which a large group of children achieve specific milestones, like sitting up, crawling, walking. They serve as a general guideline for comparison.
A guideline?
Yes. So if a baby is consistently reaching milestones significantly earlier or more commonly later than the norm, it might just prompt a pediatrician to take a closer look to investigate further.
But it's really crucial to remember, these are just averages, right? There's a huge range of what's considered typical development.
Absolutely critical. To be truly meaningful, developmental norms must be based on data from large, diverse populations. They need to reflect the natural variability among children from different backgrounds and cultures. It's so important not to use them as rigid checklists or cause unnecessary anxiety.
Right. Every baby is on their own timeline, to some extent.
Exactly. And we also have tools like the Brazelton Neonatal Behavioral Assessment Scale, often called the NBAS.
The NBAS, what kind of information does that give us?
It's an assessment that's typically done shortly after birth. It evaluates an infant's neurological health and their behavioral responses to their new environment right out of the womb. It looks at 4 key areas: how the baby interacts with caregivers, their motor behavior and reflexes, their ability to control their physiological state, like calming themselves down or regulating their temperature, and how they respond to potentially stressful situations, like a light shown in their eyes.
So it gives a picture of the newborn's capabilities.
Yeah, it offers a really valuable snapshot of the newborn's individual strengths and maybe areas where they might need a little extra support. It helps parents and caregivers understand their unique baby right from the start.
Okay, so all of this incredible physical and neurological development, it's fundamentally fueled by one absolutely essential ingredient: nutrition.
That's absolutely right. You can't overstate it. Rapid growth demands proper nourishment. In fact, during infancy, the caloric needs per pound of body weight are remarkably high.
How high are we talking?
Around 50 calories per day per pound of body weight, which
Yeah.
is, more than double the requirement for an adult, relatively speaking, and insufficient or inadequate nutrition. It doesn't just hinder their physical growth potential, it can also have really lasting negative effects on their cognitive development and even their social skills later on.
And when it comes to the ideal source of nutrition, especially in those early months, there seems to be a very, very strong consensus around breast milk.
Indeed, there is. Leading health organizations worldwide, like the WHO and AAP, all agree. Breast milk is the optimal food for infants, especially for the first 6 months.
Why is it considered so ideal?
Well, several reasons. It provides a complete and perfectly balanced array of nutrients that are tailored specifically to a baby's needs at that stage. It offers crucial antibodies and other immunological factors that help protect against illnesses like ear infections, respiratory infections, diarrhea. It's generally easier for babies to digest than formula. And, well, it's conveniently available and always at the right temperature.
Can't beat that.
Right. And there's also growing evidence suggesting potential long-term cognitive benefits for breastfed babies, though the research there is complex.
And it's not just about the core nutrients like protein and fat, is it? I heard there are other amazing components in breast milk, too.
Oh, absolutely. For example, breast milk contains things called oligosaccharides. These are complex sugars that act as prebiotics.
Prebiotics,
Yeah.
so they feed the good gut bacteria.
Exactly. They promote the growth of beneficial bacteria in the baby's gut microbiome, which we're learning is incredibly important for overall health. Plus, you can't discount the profound emotional benefits for both mother and child through that close physical bonding during breastfeeding.
Yeah.
And some studies suggest it may even offer some protective health advantages for the mother later in life, like reduced risk for certain cancers.
Okay, so what about the transition to solid foods? When does that typically happen?
The current guidelines generally recommend introducing complementary solid foods, so foods in addition to breast milk or formula, somewhere around 6 months of age, maybe up to 12 months.
And how should parents go about that?
Usually the advice is to introduce them gradually, one new food at a time, waiting a few days before introducing another. This helps you monitor for any potential allergic reactions.
Makes sense.
And the timing for fully weaning from breast milk or formula, that can vary quite a bit depending on individual choices, cultural practices, and the baby's readiness.
Sadly, though, we also need to acknowledge the really serious issues of malnutrition and food insecurity in infancy which affect so many children globally.
It's a critical global health concern. Malnutrition, which can mean not getting enough calories or protein or specific vitamins and minerals, basically an imbalance or deficiency, can have severe, long-lasting consequences.
Like,
While infants who experience chronic malnutrition are unfortunately at higher risk for stunted physical growth, impaired immune systems, and lower cognitive scores later in life. And food insecurity, which is the lack of consistent access to enough food for an active, healthy life, that's a major driver of malnutrition, particularly in developing countries.
and even in a developed country like the U.S., these issues aren't absent, are they?
Unfortunately, no. Factors like poverty, systemic inequalities, racial disparities, they all contribute to food insecurity and malnutrition right here. We saw data during the COVID-19 pandemic that really highlighted these vulnerabilities in stark ways.
Right.
Programs like SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, play an absolutely crucial role in trying to bridge that gap and address food insecurity in our communities, but the need is still significant.
And there are some very severe forms of malnutrition that it's important people are aware of.
Yes. There's marasmus, which is a severe deficiency in both calories and protein. It leads to significant wasting of body tissues, and sadly, it can be fatal.
Oh, terrible.
Then there's kwashiorkor. This is primarily caused by severe protein deficiency, even if calorie intake is closer to adequate. A characteristic sign is swelling, particularly in the belly and legs, due to fluid retention. And there's also something called non-organic failure to thrive. This is where infants don't gain weight or grow appropriately, not because of an underlying medical condition, but due to a lack of adequate caregiving, stimulation, and nurturing. It often stems from complex family circumstances like poverty, depression, or substance abuse.
Such difficult situations.
Nah.
And what about the other end of the spectrum, the concern about infant obesity?
Yeah, that's a growing concern too. Childhood obesity is generally defined using BMI percentiles specifically, being at or above the 95th percentile for children of the same age and sex.
Is being an obese baby a definite predictor of being obese later?
Well, the definitive link between obesity in infancy and obesity in adulthood is still being researched. It's not entirely clear-cut. Some studies show a correlation, others less so. But it is important to move away from that old-fashioned idea that a chubby baby is automatically a healthy baby. That's just not necessarily an accurate indicator of long-term health outcomes. Healthy weight gain is the goal.
Right. Okay, we've covered the body's growth, the brain, nutrition, incredible stuff. Now let's turn our attention to how infants begin to perceive the world around them through their developing senses.
Yeah, this is fascinating. And here, it's helpful to maybe quickly distinguish between sensation and perception.
Okay.
Sensation is the initial physical stimulation of our sensory organs, light hitting the retina, sound waves hitting the eardrum, etc. Perception is the brain's active process of interpreting, analyzing, and making sense of that raw sensory information.
God. So sensation is the input, perception is the processing. Let's start with vision. What's the visual world like for a brand new baby?
Well, newborns aren't born seeing the world in high definition. Their distance vision is actually quite blurry, typically estimated somewhere in the range of 2200 to 2600.
So legally blind, basically at a distance.
At a distance, yes. But their close-up vision, like focusing on a caregiver's face during feeding, is much better. And their ability to perceive depth and motion develops relatively quickly, often showing significant improvement around 14 weeks or so. They also show a really clear preference, even from very early on, for looking at pattern stimuli like stripes or checkerboards or faces rather than plain uniform surfaces. They seem drawn to visual complexity.
That brings to mind that famous visual cliff experiment. What did that show us about infant vision?
The visual cliff.
Yeah.
A classic. It was this clever setup with a checkerboard pattern under glass, creating the illusion of a shallow side and a deep cliff side.
Right.
What it showed was that by the time infants are mobile, usually crawling age, so between 6 and 14 months, the vast majority of them are hesitant to crawl over the apparent drop-off. They stop at the edge. This indicated that they had developed some level of depth perception. They could perceive the potential danger of the cliff.
Wow.
And related to that preference for complexity, the pioneering work by researcher Robert Fance back in the 60s used looking time to show that even very young infants prefer looking at complex visual patterns, especially faces, over simpler ones. Suggests an innate drive to seek out meaningful visual information.
Fascinating. What about their sense of hearing? Can newborns hear much right away?
Oh, yes. Hearing is actually quite well developed even before birth. We know fetuses respond to sounds from outside the womb.
Yeah.
Newborns are born with preferences for certain types of sounds. They often prefer complex sounds like voices or music over pure tones. And while pinpointing the exact location of a sound can be a bit harder for them initially, possibly due to their smaller head size affecting the timing differences between ears,
Okay.
they still possess a pretty good ability for sound localization. It improves rapidly. They can also distinguish between different groups or categories of sounds, and they are particularly attuned to human voices. They can even differentiate between their mother's voice and a stranger's voice very early on, and maybe even between different languages they've been exposed to.
Amazing. Okay, what about the other senses, smell, taste, and touch? How developed are those?
Smell is actually remarkably well developed right at birth. Newborns show distinct facial expressions and reactions to different odors, like turning away from unpleasant smells and towards pleasant ones, like milk.
Uh-huh.
They also definitely have an innate preference for sweet tastes, and interestingly, their taste preferences can even be influenced by the mother's diet during pregnancy, as those flavors can pass through into the amniotic fluid, which they swallow.
No way.
Yeah. So exposure begins even before birth. Now, regarding pain, for a long time, people kind of assumed infants didn't feel pain the way adults do. We now know that's absolutely not true.
Right.
We have a much better understanding of infant pain perception now. We can observe their responses through clear physiological indicators like increased heart rate, sweating, changes in stress hormones, as well as behavioral cues like specific facial grimaces and changes in the pitch and intensity of their cries.
That's so important to recognize.
It is. And there's even evidence suggesting that significant early experiences of pain, maybe from medical procedures, might lead to long-term changes in their nervous system development, potentially affecting how they process pain later in life.
Wow. Okay. And touch.
Touch.
That seems so fundamental right from the beginning.
Oh, absolutely fundamental. Touch is one of the earliest and most highly developed sensory systems in infants. It's crucial for many of their reflexes, like rooting and grasping. It plays a vital role in how they explore objects in their environment. And of course, it's essential for their physical growth. Studies show massage can promote weight gain in preemies and, critically, for their social and emotional development. That skin-to-skin contact, the holding, the cuddling, it's incredibly powerful.
So all these individual senses are developing rapidly. But it's not like they're operating in isolation, totally separate channels, is it? Infants must start to integrate all this information coming in.
Exactly right. That's the essence of multimodal perception. It's how infants learn to combine and coordinate the information they receive simultaneously from different senses. Like they hear a voice and turn to look for the face that goes with it. Or they see a toy, reach for it, feel its texture, maybe bring it to their mouth to taste it.
Right, putting it all together.
Yes. They start to understand that objects have properties that can be perceived through multiple senses, and this integration becomes increasingly sophisticated over the first year.
And this leads to the concept of affordances. That's a term I haven't really encountered before in this context.
Yeah, affordances. It's a concept from ecological psychology, largely developed by James Gibson. It basically refers to the possibilities for action that a particular object or situation offers or affords an individual.
Okay. Give me an example.
Sure. So a flat, solid surface affords walking on. A small, graspable object affords picking up. A knob affords turning. A liquid affords pouring or drinking. It's about perceiving the function or use inherent in the properties of things relative to your own capabilities.
I see. So it's not just seeing a chair, it's seeing something that affords sitting.
Precisely. As infants develop their motor skills and their ability to integrate sensory information, they become much better at perceiving these accordances. They start to understand what they can do with the objects and surfaces in their environment. It's key to how they learn to interact effectively with the world.
It's truly, truly mind-boggling when you step back and consider the sheer magnitude of physical development that unfolds in such a short space of time during infancy.
It really is.
From those initial reflexive movements to the emergence of this sophisticated sensory understanding and all those coordinated motor skills, it's just an absolutely foundational period of life.
Couldn't agree more. We've touched on so much that remarkable pace of their bodily growth, the fundamental and intricate development of their brains and nervous systems, how their bodily functions like sleep and waking become integrated and regulated, the crucial role of those inborn reflexes and that step-by-step progression of their motor abilities, the non-negotiable role of nutrition in fueling Absolutely all of it. The fascinating awakening of their senses to the world around them, and then finally how they begin to weave together all that sensory input to actually create meaning and understand affordances.
So considering this incredibly rapid development and the brain's just amazing capacity to be shaped by early experiences, that plasticity we talked about, it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What are the most profound and perhaps underestimated ways that these very early interactions, these sensory inputs, fundamentally shape who we become? Not just physically, but in the very way we perceive and engage with the world around us for the rest of our lives.
That's a deep question.
It's definitely something to continue contemplating. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.